Hello. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So, from today, like we will be focusing more on the advanced topics. So, I think we covered almost the basic things and some advanced topics as well as part of our sessions. So, you can go through this playlist, which I'm going to paste it in the chat. And I strongly recommend, in case if you covered some basics also, but I strongly request everyone to cover this topic before you are starting with we are starting with the real time projects. Because in this video we covered like what is the prerequisites for the RE framework, to understand what are the different things we should consider before we start with RE framework implementations. And I'm pretty sure like we taken a long break, almost for a month. So even my existing batch also will forgot a lot of things. So I strongly recommend to go through at least this video, UiPath Assets, REFramework prerequisites, where we covered related to the assets, queues, and some concepts, config dictionary, and how we are going to use. So, what is our requirement of each of the topics? And in this session, we are going to start with the RE framework and followed by Git integration and best practices. So these three sessions will be covered in this week. And from Monday, we are going to start with our real-time projects. Let me open my notepad. Mm. Mm. RE framework. So I think just copy these URLs, because you will not get these URLs once you are moved out of this meeting. So I strongly suggest to go through at least this video if you are clear with your basics. If you are not clear with your basics and if you want to have a recap, you can completely follow this playlist. And for all these three videos, whatever is the sessions we are going to cover in the next 3 days, we are going to cover and we are going to release these as a public videos for the next 3 days also, for RE framework and all. But from Monday, the videos will not be released out. And clear, guys. Can we go ahead and start our session, or anything if you want to ask? Guys, can you hear me out? At least if I can get some confirmation, right, then I'll be uh, knowing that like you can hear me out or you could able to get something.
Yeah. Yes, yes, I can hear it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so let us come on top of the RE framework. Let me close this. I don't require that. Before we jump into see the architecture of RE framework and all, let us first understand few things. So what is RE framework? Before going for a RE framework, right? What is a framework? So what you mean by framework? Framework is nothing but
Hmm? Hmm.
so I think Bartik, can you please go on mute? And we just started. So before we move further, right? So I just gave this URLs. This video is a must video to be watched for RE framework, because this is the video which is covering the prerequisites for the RE framework. What we should know. apart from the basics. And if you are not clear about the basics, you can go through this playlist where we covered all the basic things. And today we are going to discuss about the RE framework. And everyone is asking about RE framework in if you attend any interview in UiPath, or if you start with any project in UiPath, people will start asking about the RE framework. So first, let us understand what is a framework. Framework is nothing but a- it creates basic libraries which can be used in the projects or development, which will reduce your code. Okay, it will help you to reduce your code, and which will serve as a base for your development. An example, you can say .NET framework, right? You can say .NET framework is for C# or a VB, like all the Microsoft based programming languages. We have the .NET framework, which is a base for that. Even for UiPath also, the framework is .NET framework, because it uses the same framework what actually the Microsoft products are using, and which is built on top of the .NET framework. And .NET framework is a prerequisite for your UiPath Studio to be installed. When we are installing UiPath Studio, automatically the .NET framework will be get installed. Okay, and we have a robot framework which will be on Python for testing. So we have all these frameworks, and the framework is nothing but a list of libraries or list of dependencies, whatever we have in order to utilize them. You see, in case if you don't have this libraries, right, you need to write all the code, whatever is there. And we generally used to call them math functions, right? We will, let us suppose um, sum, sum of a comma b, a plus b, right? Sum of 1 plus 2. And this sum is a method which is there in the base library itself, and we will be utilizing it. And if you see, right, we will be using in programming languages in Python, we will be using import, and in the C# or VB, we will be using, right? So those are the libraries or whatever we have, right? Those are the wrappers inside of our framework by default available. And even in UiPath also we have that. See here, import namespaces. So all these namespaces will be included inside of our frameworks itself. There are some which needs to be installed separately, like how we are going to install from the mainnet packages. In case if you install some nugget package from the mainnet packages, and you can see some changes happening on the import as well, because these are based on the libraries whatever we have, these will be automatically get imported, and we can import new also based on the requirement, right? And now let us come to REFramework. The full form is Robotic Enterprise Framework. So here, is it really a framework? So it depends on, it's a very um, um, uh, different discussion altogether. It's a controversial topic, whether you want to say RE framework or robotic enterprise template. So it's a so you can call it either framework or a template. But what I always prefer to call is it is a template, because it is not including any more libraries. What it is doing is it is just creating a skeleton for you to directly use the template and reduce your code effectiveness, coding uh, what do you say? Majority of the code will be already handled. So if you see the robotic enterprise framework template, what advantages you are going to get. So I always call it as a template because some of the code is already developed and it was ready for the reusability. Okay. And there are no additional libraries involved in this, or there is no additional functions you are going to get. So what it is giving you is, see, when we say template, we call it as a reusable component from where we can start building our process. So here, when you consider the REFramework, it is a template which is providing you as a reusable template kind of thing, and from where you can directly start implementing your process. What comes along with this template? Logging mechanism. So if you see in the debugging mode and exception handlings, right? So we will be using the log messages. Why we will be using the log messages? To trace the process execution and any errors if occurred. So in case if any errors occur, it will be easy for us to, and log messages are the only point of source, primary point of source for us to trace what actually happened. By default, we are going to get that. Let me just put in this way. And exception handling. By default, we have exception handling in place. So if any error occurred, and by default, the errors will be handled in this template. It is not necessary for us to build an additional exception handling at the high level, but still we may need to do the local exception handling. It is not completely eliminating the exception handling, and it is not completely giving you the log messages, whatever is required for the entire project, but it is eliminating some of your work. And when we say the reusable components, which means generalized functionalities required. So generalized functionalities, whatever is there required for that. So we will be having that generalized functionalities. And when we are building it as a process template, we will be considering which functionalities are required for all the processes. When I say the high level exception handling and the logging mechanism, that will be common across all the processes. When it comes to the local exception handling or traceability log messages, in between, whenever we are performing the critical actions in the process, we will be using this log messages again, right? That will vary from the process to process. That is the reason for which high level logging and the exception handling already in place. And what else do we have? Retry mechanism. Retry mechanism is already in place. So in case of any error while processing, there is an option retry the process. This is also in place for us. So it is not necessary for us to work on this because it is already in place. And in case if you want to change something and if you want to build something new, then you can always modify it. But by default, you are getting these functionalities. And what additional thing we are going to get? Organizing, organized code. So based on the actions performed, we will have code organization with the RE framework. Why, how we are going to get this code organization? because REFramework is built on top of state machines. So the state machines is a concept in .NET framework. So what actually the state machine means? The state machine will be, code will be organized in stages or states and transition from one state to other state will happen based on transition conditions. Which means your code will be organized into different states and one state to the other state execution, right, will follow based on the conditions. And here, how many states we are going to have in the state machine? In state machine, we will be having two states. One is state and state. So these are the only two states which we are going to have in state machines. Not in REFramework, in state machines. Let me come to here. In the activities panel, you can see state, state, final state. Sorry, it's not and final state. Here in state machines, states will have entry criterias, and exit criterias, right? State will have entry criteria and exit criteria. Final state will have only entry criteria. Because you are saying that with that, we don't have the flow to the next state. So we are saying that with this state, we are ending our process. If we are not saying that we are not ending the process, it will be keep on looping into another state, and it will keep on going. So that is the reason for which final state will have only the entry point. It will not have the exit point. That is the reason for which we have two states in the state machines. And when it comes to the REFramework, by default, we have four states: initialization, get transaction data, process transaction data, end process. So these are the four states we have in REFramework. And this is of state. This is also a state, state, and this is final state. So in the end process, we are going to use final state. So here, can we add any additional states? Can we add more states? Or can we remove existing? Absolutely. Yes. We can add or remove the states. But we cannot add one more final state, or we cannot remove the final state, which is nothing but end process. Except that we can add or we can remove. So this is about like in case, see, maybe this can be your interview question. See, all this, whatever we are discussing, right? Um, this this will be your interview question. When the people will ask about the RE framework, you can start from here. And we can mention that it is built on top of state machines. And you can mention this states from one state to the other state. And you can mention we will be having two states in the state machines. And we can have in this way. And we can add or remove the states from RE framework, and but we need to have one final state. The basic condition is we should have at least one state and one final state in state machines. This is what the basic criteria for RE framework. Okay. So is there any questions till this place? Okay.
Yeah, Path, here I have one doubt.
Yeah, please.
If you remove the state get process state, so how it works?
Yeah, sure. I'll cover it. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Uh, so, and whatever we have the RE framework by default. By default, works for transactional process. When we say the transactional process or iterative process, which means process steps are same for different data. Okay. So the process steps are same for different data. And let us suppose you want to build a linear process, which means you don't have any transactions. You just need to perform some actions and you want to use the RE framework, right? Either you can modify get transaction data state, or you can delete get transaction data state. Because get transaction data state is the state which is going to retrieve that transaction data which needs to be processed, right? But here you can remove it. Let us suppose I removed it. So I got then I need to have one more from here to here, right? I'll just directly add it. And here the condition I'll be changing. It is not the T1. Here we will be saying that here we are saying that system exception is not nothing, right? Which means there is a system exception. In that case, we are going to end process state. But here I'll say nothing, which means successful. In case I'll explain you how I'm doing this. So now, in case if it is an error, it will go to the end process state. In case if it is successful, it would directly go to the process transaction. Now there is no get transaction data for me. Let us suppose you just need to go to a website and you just need to pull some data and you just need to save it in a one file. So here you don't need any input parameters, right? and you don't have any data to be retrieved. So we'll directly go to the process. Then I don't need this get transaction data state, right? So if you remove that, you just need to point out which in which condition there should be an entry for this process transaction. And here you have an exit in case if it is a system exception, right? Let me just go. It is not that much so simple. I just showed you like how we can remove a existing state and we can connect to the another state. There are some other things also which we may need to follow in order to go for it. That we will cover anyhow. How we can modify the existing framework and how we can do that, right? So here, let us come back to this REFramework. So here is our states: initialization, get transaction data state, process transaction, and end process state. And we mentioned, right? Transition from one state to the other state will be based on the transition conditions. What are the conditions in the initialization state? See, initialization state, what we are going to do? What we are going to do in the initialization state? In the initialization state, first let us list out in this way, entry, exit, action. Let us put this action in between entry and exit. Right? So in each and every state, we will be having this, right? Entry, exit, and action. So let me double click on this. See here, entry, on which the entry will happen. That we will see, because entry will not have any conditions here, but in the states. Okay. And this is the action which we are going to perform. And these are the exit. While exiting, what actions you want to see? This is entry. During the entry, what action to be performed? And while exit, what action need to be performed? You can put a log message or you can do some actions. It's up to us. And the transitions. And if it is successful, the destination is get transaction data. If there is an exception, the destination is end process state. So here we have the conditions, and based on what condition it needs to go. How we can see the conditions? If you see this is the system exception transition connector, right? If you double click on this connector, you will see this. The source is initialization state. And in case of there is no system exception, sorry, there is a system exception, not nothing means, which means it is having some value. If there is an exception, it will go to the get transaction data state, right? In Yeah, here it is. If there is a, let me come here. If I select this, it is coming from successful, right? If there is no system exception, it will go to the end process state, right? If there is an exception, then we'll go to the get transact. Sorry, one second, guys. Just hold on. If there is no exception, system exception is nothing. It will go to the get transaction data state. If there is an exception, not nothing means there is some value in the system exception. It will go to the end process state. So this is how the transition conditions can be defined. And let us suppose you want to have one more condition. You can just click on this. You can just put process transaction. And here you can give the condition. So it's up to us. We can add any n number of conditions. And let us suppose I want to delete this. I want to remove this connection, right? So let us come here. So this has got added, right? This is the link which has got added. Click on delete. It is lost. So this is how we can define the entry and exit also. So now the entry to the initialization, when the process is started, and when there is a system exception in process transaction state. If there is an exception, system exception in the sense not related to the data. So there are two types of exceptions we will be dealing with here. Business exception, which is error in input data itself. System exception, any unhandled or application related exceptions. So these are the two different type of exceptions we'll be dealing with here. And in case if there is a system exception in the process transaction state, it will come to the initialization state. There are two entry points for initialization. Start of the process, system exception in process transaction state. Okay. This will be the entry point for initialization state. And the action, what action we are going to perform inside of this. Let us come here and see. So how it is checking whether it is a first run or not. First run in the sense that any entry point is from the start of the process. How it is going to check. See, we have a config variable which we are going to use throughout our process. And initially, when the process is triggered, it will not have any data because only in case of the first condition, we are going to read all the data and we are getting the config dictionary object. So if this dictionary is not having any value, it will read all the configuration settings. Okay. And irrespective whether it is coming from the start of the process or system exception, it will initialize the applications. So only during the start of the process reads the configurations and asset values. And also opens all the applications. Initialization is nothing but making all of your applications ready for the process to be automated, which means it is setting the base for your process, logging into the applications, reading configurations, and getting all the information related to the application and the asset values which needs to be used, the variable things. So this is what we are going to perform in initialization state. And this is during the start of the process. When it comes to the system exception, opens all the applications. And reading of the configuration and asset values will happen in init all settings. And opening of all the applications will happen in init all applications. So this is what we are going to perform inside of our initialization state. And what is the exit we have? Let us come back. And if you see here, right, system exception to the end process, successful to the get transaction data state. So system exception to end process, successful to the get transaction data state. So this is the entry, action, and exit for initialization state. Now get transaction data state. So here we can write right in the initialization state, making all the applications, sorry, reading all the configurations and opens all the applications and making the environment ready for the process to be executed, right? Can we say in this way for the initialization state? Yes. Now the get transaction data state. So in the get transaction data state, this is the state where we are getting the data to be processed, or in other ways, getting the data to be utilized in the process transaction, right? And what is the entry for this? Action for this? Exit for this. So by default, when we see, right, there are three entry points for this. Successful in the initialization, successful in the process transaction, business exception in the process transaction. From the process transaction itself, there are two transitions. Okay, because in the initialization, to retrieve the next available transaction data, and in case of successful or a business exception, to retrieve the next available data to be processed. Right. So the entries are successful in initialization, successful in process transaction, and business exception in process transaction. Okay, so this is the entry criteria for get transaction data state. And what action we are going to perform? Retrieve the transaction data, which means getting the data to be processed. By default, from orchestrator queues, and this can be modified for any iterable object. When I say iterable object, it can be array or a list or data table. So in any of this, which means it needs to be iterable. Okay. And what is the exit for this? The exit is there are two things. One is no data and the other is new transaction. So only two we have. No data available for transaction. One is new transaction data available. So these are the two conditions. And here, if there is no data available, it will go to the end process. And here it will go to the process transaction. Because when you have the data, you need to process it. And if you don't have the data, you can stop the process. But what I say is, accept the new transaction data available. All the other scenarios will go to the end process state, which means no data, error in getting the data. There might be a possibility of errors, right? Like we are not sure if in case if we use something and if there is an error occurred and if we missed out to handle it, or if we missed out to wrote some wrong code there there is a possibility of getting an error. And when it is trying to retrieve the data from Orchestrator, there might be a delay in the API call. The timeout may happen. Maybe your Orchestrator server is down. So there will be a lot of scenarios while you are getting the data from. So there might be a possibility of getting an error. And stop signal is received from the orchestrator. So in orchestrator, when your job is getting executed, you have an option to stop the process. When you try to stop the process from orchestrator, it will not immediately terminate the process. It will wait for that particular execution to be completed. And in the get transaction data state, it will check whether the stop signal is received or not. If the stop signal is received, it will not proceed further. It will go to the end process state. See here, the transaction data, it is putting it as nothing. So instead of uh, putting a couple of more conditions in the exit, here itself, we are putting it as a nothing. And if you see, right, each and every workflows, whatever we are going to have, right, in the else case, it will be inside the try catch. And here, in case if any error occurred while getting the transaction data, what it is doing is it is setting up that there is no transaction data available. So in all these scenarios, it will consider to be no data. That's why these are the all conditions, three conditions, which will be under no data, and it will lead to the end process state. Okay. And now process transaction. What is the entry we have? Action, exit. Entry is only one point of entry for this, right? Here it is. The entry is new transaction data available. Okay. And the action, before going for the action, right? Let us go for the exit. So in the exit, we have three exit criteria: successful, business rule exception, and system exception. In case of successful and business rule exception, it will go to the get transaction data state. In case of system exception, it will go to the initialization state. Right? Successful, business rule exception, get transaction data state. System exception, go to the initialization state. Why? The reason is, in case of system exception, which means it is considering that there is an issue with the application. So it needs to reopen the application. In case of system exception, there is a possibility of error with applications. So it will go to initialization to open the applications. Okay. And the action what we have, right? There is nothing inside of your process as of now. If you go to this process.yaml, there is nothing, which means all the process which need to be automated will be inside of this. So we are clear till this place, and we have some hidden functionalities in the process transaction as well. See, in case of system exception, right, it is going to the initialization to open the applications. So to open the application, you need to close the existing instance, right? So there is a workflow, set transaction status. Here in the set transaction status, if I come here, here it is, set transaction status. This is common in successful, business rule exception, and system exception, because based on the conditions, it will go into the different sequences here. Okay. And in case of system successful and business rule exception, very minor differences will be there. Common thing is update the status of the transactions item or data, which means it will update whether it is a failure or a successful. Of course, in the system exception also it will do that. Before that, there will be a couple of logic before updating the status. Okay. And here, in case of successful and the business rule exception, it will update the transaction status. And in case of business rule exception, it will update to the failed. In case of successful, it will update to the success. And in the failed, it will update the status in a different way. Let me come here, set transaction status failed. And if I come to the properties, it will specify the reason, error type, business or application. In case of system exception, it will update it as application. In case of business rule exception, it will update it as a business exception. And you can send a notification email and all these things, you can put it here. In case of successful, if you want to send, you can send it from here, right? Here, see, there is no difference except the status update, right? There is nothing else. Here it is successful. Here it is failed and the properties got changed. Except these two, there is no other difference we have between the business rule exception and the successful. And then it will increment the transaction number and we will get the transaction number. In case of system exception, the mandatory thing, whatever we have, right? In case of system exception, the business rule exception, it is not necessary for you to take the screenshot and sending the notifications with the screenshot and all. But in case of system exception, we need to take the screenshot. Because you need to get to know where exactly it is got failed, on which screen it is got failed. Is it because of our process, or is there any some notifications or updates or change in the application? Because of that, it is got failed. So all these things, we will get the insights from the screenshot. Okay, and we need to send it on an email. So it is our wish, like we can just set it. And in case of status updation, it will change application, right? And in case we can add the screenshot path also into that, and we can open the screenshot and we can see in case if we are not sending out any email notification. In case if we are sending an email notification, we can attach the screenshot and we can send it out. And also what it will do is it will close all the applications. Close all the applications. And then it will go to the initialization and it will open the applications, which means we are going to close all the applications and then we are going to open the applications in case of system exception. And one more thing we have in the system exception is retry. Whether you want to retry the current transaction or not. So in case when we are creating a queue, we have an option to retry option and we can specify number of retries. So what it will do is check if the retry is available. If the retry is available, it will update the status to retried and clone a new transaction item, which will be processed after clearing the existing, not immediately. it will continue with the next transaction, and whatever we got failed, right? The status will be updated to retry, and then a new transaction item will be created, and that will be executed after completing the existing transactions. And if the retry is not available, if retry is not available, it will update the status to fail. This is how the set transaction status will work in all these scenarios. And this is about all the three states, whatever we have. And now let us go to end process. Entry, exit. So for end process, there is no exit because it's a final state. And the entry is, if you see here, the entry is system exception in the initialization, no data in the get transaction. So what I can do, I can take out this in initialization. Okay. And all this exit of get transaction data state. Get transaction data state. So this is how the entry of the end process. And the action we are going to perform is close all the applications. And if any error occurred, kill all the processes or kill application processes. When I say close all applications, if I have an application, closing this will be a closing of the applications. And I have this application. And if I go to the task manager, and if I directly come here and end task, which will go under the kill process, will directly kill this Chrome. So these are the actions which we are going to perform. And even in the system exception also, we are invoking the same workflow, closing of all the workflows, right? And in the exception, kill all process. These are the actions which we are going to perform in the end process state. And this is all about the RE framework. And also, if you want to get more insights about RE framework, right? Let me go to the channel. So I have created a playlist from where I taken a single sequence and built this RE framework from step by step. Each and every module, whatever we discussed till now, is developed from the scratch to the RE framework. So in case if you need any additional information. And let me know if you have any questions. Now we are open for the questions and any queries related to the RE framework, please let me know.
So, Path, the target framework for transactional process, right? Transactional
Yeah, see, RE framework
process
we
or
will be
transaction
using.
process.
Yeah, RE framework we will be using for the transactional process, but we can implement that for the linear process also.
Okay. Like get the data multiple times over multiple data, right? To process for a
Multiple
transactional
times.
process
I'm not
or
getting your
multiple
question.
data. Get the data, like get the multiple data over Sorry.
No, see, you have the
Little bit
multiple
confusing.
data.
Okay.
1 second. Yeah. 1 second, just give me a moment, guys. Sorry. See, we will be processing on multiple data. Okay. We will, and the get transaction data state will facilitate you to get the data one after the other.
Yeah.
Yes, Atish. Basically, the high level, right? If you see at the each state level, you have a try catch by default, but you can ignore all the exception handlings. All the things will be taken care by that. But in process dot YAML, right? In the process transaction, you may need to implement the exception handling based on the functionality and the criticality. And we are going to see in our real-time project, like what additional exception handling and what additional log messages we are going to implement. And also, we are going to build a dispatcher performer model. Both will be on top of REFramework only. One is with orchestrator queues and the other is without orchestrator queues. Any more questions, guys? Ravindra, Chaitanya, Atish, Bharti, Mom, Gauss. Any questions? Yeah. And if you don't have any questions, I think we can wind up this session. And I'll upload this video right away, probably in the next couple of hours, and you'll get the notification.